If you want to make a simple inventory in Godot 4, this is tutorial for you. We will be making simple inventory where you can swap the items, drag and drop them to different slots, and you can have different size of inventories. You can also make a hotbar from them by setting the inventory size to 10 slots horizontally and single slot vertically. And let's get right into it. You can start by downloading cainos itch.io pixel art icon pack RPG. Let's start by creating the 2D scene, and we name this item. And we create a new script for this item, and we bring textures here by writing item, apple, preload, and if you start writing apple, you will get the texture. Let's import ham, sword, pickaxe, potion red and blue, diamond, and armor. Then we make constant array of items, and this will be just for the textures. Then we will make a new function named getTexture, takes index, returns texture. If the index is smaller than 0, we just return null. And we can limit the maximum by setting here, take the minimum of the index or length of the item textures -1. Length is always 1 bigger than the maximum index, so we will safely get the texture. And in the process function, we will get the item texture by the ID. We will create 2 new variables for item ID, which will be -1 for the start, and also current ID, which is also -1. And in the process, if current ID is not item ID, we will set the current ID to be item ID. This will happen only when item ID changes. Now that we know what it does, we can get the texture by the item ID. We also need to add the new texture here. So add child node, sprite 2D, and let it be empty texture. We get the sprite, texture, and set the texture by the item index. Now we can export this variable at export var item ID, and we can change the item ID from here. Let's set it, for example, 2. And at the top, if we create a tool here and reload the script, this is now tool script, and it will be running in the editor. Now we can change the item ID, and we can see that the item changes. Let's also double the scale of the item and change the filtering to nearest, which will make the pixels sharper. So next thing we are going to do is to create another 2D scene, and we will name this one InventoryNode, and we create a script for it. And let's save the scene. Now then, let's define the size of the inventory. So slots X and slots Y. Then we define the slot size and half a slot. Half a slot is just half times the slot size. Let's also add some spacing. We can also then calculate the maximum amount of slots, which is slots X times slots Y. Now we want to draw something visible, and we can use these constants we created. We do this by first creating a function where we can get the position by the index starting from top left corner. Slot X is just modulo 3 of the index, which will always return 0, 1 or 2. Slots Y we get when we divide the index by the amount of slots in the row and take the integer of that. Then we just simply return slot size plus spacing times slots X and Y in a vector, and we get slot position by the index. Then we create a function named draw. This is a default function which exists in every node. In the function, we create a for loop which loops from 0 to max slots, and we get a rectangle which position is from the function by the index and the size is slot size. And then we draw the rectangle with the color antique white. Now, when we run, we see the perfect inventory of 3x4. Next, we want to make the slots hoverable, and for that we need mouse position and the inverse of this function. So we want to get index by the position, and by default we just return -1. This is our nothing hovered value. Then we discard all negative values for both X and Y. We also return -1 for values where position is outside of inventory. Now we can calculate the rough slot position by dividing the position by slot size plus spacing. We can then get integer of that to get the precise slot coordinates. Then the index is just product of those coordinates, where y is the row count and x is added to that. Then we return index instead of -1. Now we can go down here above process and we create new variable named HowardIndex with the value of -1. Then we make a local variable in the process where we take the local mouse position from the getLocalMousePosition and we get the index from newly created function for the HowardIndex. Now we can go to the draw function, create new variable named col and set it to dim gray. And we use that color. And we create new if clause here where if the index is HowardIndex, we just set the color to gray, which is a bit lighter. We also need to make sure that we are drawing for every frame, so let's queue redraw in the process. And we can start and we can see that it's hovering and updating the inventory tiles accordingly. Let's then add some items to the inventory node. Let's go to the 2D view and instantiate child scene. We create a few items. Duplicate this item and let's move them apart a little bit. Then let's change every item to be different and go back to the script. Now we add new items array variable which we instantiate in the ready function and fill it with null values from 0 to max slots. Then we add all the children we can get to their corresponding positions in the items array. Then we need to create a new function where we update the positions for each item in the items array and we call the update function once in the ready function. In this function we loop through the indices 0 to maximum slots and get the item and update its position. If it's not null to the position, get from the other function we created. So getPosByIndex. We also need to add a half slot to the position because the position points to the corner and the sprite is centered in the item. Now if we test it, we see that the items are nicely in their positions. Now it would be nice to drag and drop the items to different slots, wouldn't it? So let's do it by going down here in the process function and first we create new variable named picked_item which is null by default. Then in the process function we create a new logic where we pick the item up if the hovered index is valid and the mouse is clicked. And for that we need to add new mouse left input. We can add the input by going to the project settings, input map, add new action. We write here mouse left exactly the same way as we wrote in the process function. Click add, click the plus, go to the mouse buttons, left mouse button, OK, and close. Then we are going to get the item from another function which is not yet written, so we just write a comment here and pass. Then we go down a little bit and we create a new function here called getItem. And we are going to get the item by the index. And this will return item. And since the item is not yet defined, it cannot find the type for the item. So we go to the item script and we go to the top and below tool we write class name item and save. Then go back to the inventory node and you see that we return a null here. Now it recognizes the item correctly. In the getItem we return null if the item index is below 0 or if the index is more than the max slots -1. Then we get the item from the items array to the temporary variable and we set the item slot to null to clear the item slot and we return the variable. The last return null is not needed. Now we get the item in the hovered index and if the item is not null, then we can pick it up and set it to picked item, and down here we can set if the picked item is indeed not null, we can set its position to the global mouse position. Now we also want to drop the item, so when left mouse is just released, we drop the item to the hovered index. Then we set the pick item to be null. We will come back to this, but we just want to test it now. So we can pick the item and drop it to another slot. Now notice that the inventory is not updating yet. For that we need to go and write here update item positions. Now if we run this, the item positions are updating and you can drag and drop the items to different slots. Now notice that we are not checking if there are items in the hovered index. So what we are really doing is we are replacing the existing item with the picked item and we want to swap the items instead. So we need to make a new checking function for this. Let's make a new function called setItem. In this function we will keep the item to be placed and the index where it should be placed. Then we can just get the item from the slot, and if the slot item is null, we know that the slot is empty, and we can place the item directly to the slot. Then we can return true if the item was placed in the slot, or false if we couldn't place the item. Now we can go to the process function and make sure that we use the setItem function we just created. And before that we can get the existing item from the slot into another variable. This way we can check if the item slot is null, we just place the item, or if it couldn't be placed, we know that it's outside the inventory, and when the item in slot is not null, we swap the items. To be able to swap the items, we need to save the picked index. So let's create it right now under the hovered index and set the value to be -1. Then let's set the picked index when we pick the item up. The picked index value is obviously the hovered index. Now back to the swap items part, and we will put the item in the existing slot to the picked index and set the picked item to the hovered index because we know that is empty now. Then above here, when the position is outside the inventory, we just return the item back to its picked item index. Now we also need to change this a little bit and check if the hovered index is indeed between 0 and max slots. Only then we can place the item in the slot, otherwise we just return it to the original position. Now we can test it and we can swap the items, we can try to drop them out of the inventory, they will return to their original positions and they will swap perfectly. But there's one more thing we need to do. If we go up here, we see that in this function getPosByIndex, we have the index set directly to 3 and we want this to be from the slots x variable. Same here, slots x. This way we can change the slot size to whatever. We can change this one to 5 and this one to 3 and we check. Now it's a different size of inventory and it's working perfectly. Let's also test the Hotbar version. So 1 slot vertically and 10 slots horizontally, and let's run the scene and we can see that we have a Hotbar which can work similarly to the inventory. That's about it. If you liked the video, please give it a like, and if you want to know how to make a platformer in 5 minutes, I made a video about it. Go check it out. Thanks guys, see you in the next one.